So hi, I'm Shawnee Love, and I am a consultant. I operate a company called Love HR, and we work with clients that don't have in-house HR and need some extra help. And basically, clients call us from everything to, we're thinking about hiring, how do we do it, who do we hire, to, okay, now we've got someone, how do we pay them, when do we give them raises, how do we train them, orient them. And then on the other side, we often get calls for, oh, we've got a problem, this person isn't showing up for work on time, or they're not performing, and how do we handle that? And sometimes, that process does end up ultimately in exiting them as well. So really anything that an in-house HR person would do, that's what we get calls for. And it's a lot of fun. We end up helping a lot of different clients. So the first place I would expect my employee would learn about my terms and conditions of employment would be in the job posting, where I'd talk about the schedule, or perhaps I might talk about, what type of employment they're looking. Is it temporary, or is it year-round? And then, of course, when they join my company, how we know they're joining us is because we give them an offer letter. And it's probably the number one thing I have to argue with my clients about the importance of is an offer letter. And the reason I say that is because most times employers think, I can do it on a handshake. I don't need that kind of thing. And they're right until something goes wrong. And then that little 1 or 2 piece of paper is worth its weight in gold. And unfortunately, you can't do an offer after they've started. You have to do it before they begin. So that's really where I say, lay out the terms and conditions, the big things. What's your schedule? What's your position? How much vacation am I going to give to you? How much, are you going to get back in return as it relates to things like benefits or training allowances? What can you expect from me? How far in advance do we have to hear when you're going on vacation? Any of that kind of information, stuff that's important to you, rules that you apply every day, those kinds of things should go in an offer. And the other thing I'll say is the thing about an offer letter is it stands beyond the time that your employee finishes. So let's just say, for example, you've developed a really cool new technology. Perhaps you've developed a new seedling that you don't really want your competitors to know about. Or maybe you've got a way or a style of doing something that is really your competitive advantage. You want to put a confidentiality clause in your offer letter, because what that'll do is it'll enable you to bind your employee from speaking about your competitive advantage, not only while they're working with you, but after they've finished. And that's the tricky thing about usually a handbook, which I think has to have the terms and conditions in it. It ends when your employment ends. But a contract, on the other hand, that lovely offer letter is binding as long as you say it's binding. So you want to put that in early and upfront. I tell my clients the 3 reasons to have these things in your handbooks. 1, you don't want to get the same questions over and over, as I've already said. 2, you want to be in a position to remind yourself on those rare one-of things that don't happen very often. I had a client not too long ago was like, how do we handle mat leave? We've only had one and we've been in business 20 years. Well, if we had it in our handbook, they could have referred and figured out how to do it. And then the 3rd reason that you really want to have those terms and conditions in there is because the consistent approach for all employees is what makes it stand up and actually be something that you can be confident will be respected by employees. And if they do ever complain about it, you can rely on the fact that you treat everybody fairly. And that alone will actually help you if you did ever end up in court as well. A really good handbook, in my opinion, not only talks about the terms and conditions of employment, but it also spends some time talking about what an employee can expect from you from a perspective of people practices. And a big one is, of course, the orientation. So you might have a section in your handbook that says, you can expect to be oriented to your job and to the company. You can expect a tour, you can expect health and safety training. We'll certify you in, perhaps it's forklift training or whatever it is that you need to have in order to do that job. And as just sort of a way to explain to employees that a handbook says right up front, all employees are going to get the same training, and then they're all going to end up, basically when they're finished, having to sign off saying that they've had this training. And that to me, it's the old thing about how you communicate with somebody. You tell them what you're going to do, then you do it, and then you tell them what you've done. And a handbook has that whole process in it. So that's really where you telegraph what you're going to do. And then, of course, the form afterwards that says, hey, we completed this training, is where they can say, we've done it. In a handbook, when you're talking about performance management, I guess there's a few topics you want to lay out. One of them is that, of course, you will be communicating specific standards and expectations on a case-by-case basis, on a job-by-job basis to each employee. And they should know that. They should know that they have a right to hear from you, their boss, what they're going to be expected to accomplish. The other piece that is invaluable to employees is to understand how often we're going to be checking in with them. How much oversight or supervision are they going to have? And part and parcel of that, in somebody's initial training period, in their probationary period, we're often hovering around a little bit more than normal. It should be important to them to know that, this is really a training period. I'm going to be here helping you out. You're going to experience some job shadowing. Maybe you're going to work with somebody to train you. Those kinds of topics can be really useful and including in the handbook. Of course, it's too difficult to specify all the standards for every single job in a handbook, and it doesn't make sense to put them in there because jobs change as well. But to outline in the handbook that, this is what you can expect from me as an employer. You can expect training. You can expect some shadowing. You can expect to have, a number of people who you can have as go-to people. And while the names and specific, phone numbers won't be in there, they'll know that they should have that. And if they don't, they should come and ask you. And that's really the tone that I look to have in a handbook, is that, if you're not finding this, please come and consult with us. Because, one, it kind of holds us accountable. And two, if an employee asks for something, I'm more likely to remember to give it to them in my busy, flustered day. So it's worthwhile to indicate in a handbook what they can expect. And then, hopefully if you've hired someone who's good and keen, they will come and ask you for it. So an employee handbook, if you have a probationary period and you want to enforce it, when you put it into a handbook, you want to make sure you lay out the terms very clearly. And the terms that are most often seen in probationary periods, one is, of course, the length of time that it is. So is it 3 months? Is it 1 month? Is it 6 months? Now, remember, if it was 6 months, you only get to rely on the 3-month employment standard rule up to the 3-month point. But let's say for ease sake, we're following employment standards and it is 3 months. We write our probationary period is 3 months. It's a time period when we'll be evaluating you, your attendance, perhaps, your quality of work, how quickly you learn the job, how well you fit in and interact with the other team members. You could put down those criteria so people know what to expect. And then the other piece is, how will I know when the probationary period is over? Do I get a letter? Do I get, an interview and an evaluation? Do I get a formal, performance review? Do I get a slap on the back? Or will I get a raise? All of those kinds of things employees are really interested in. It's important to have them in the handbook and explain what they can expect. So what are important sections to have in a training policy? Well, I think the number one is what's the purpose of training? What are you trying to do with it? Are you trying to grow people for career advancement? Are you trying to get them better in their individual jobs? Is it both? Or is it something else? So I always believe in having a purpose statement in there that explains what you're trying to achieve with the program. And then the next piece is to sort of lay out the specifics of what and how they go about, what they have to do and how they go about accessing the money. So do they pay in advance and then you reimburse upon successful completion of the program? Do they pay in advance but you give them the money up front just through a reimbursement program? Or do they have to get it approved through you and then you pay for it? Those are the kinds of contemplations you want to do before, of course, someone comes and asks you for the first check. And so if you put that into your handbook, if you think it through how you'd like to do it, and then lay it out in the handbook, it's much easier for people to meet the expectations of the program. And that's the biggest thing. I often see a one-liner that says, we'll give, training money, but there's no clarification on how to go about getting it. There's no clarification on how much will be given. Is it 100% reimbursed or 50? Do you pay after? Do you pay before? All of those kinds of things need to be thought about and ideally written down in your handbook before the employee comes and asks you. Because I have had one situation where an employer just had a very short, brief line and the employee, in fairness, did not interpret it the same way the employer did and registered for a course, a very expensive course that they couldn't get their money back on. And the employer didn't want to pay. And the employee felt that they should pay. And now you have this very unhappy employee and a very unhappy employer, frankly, because neither one can afford to put in this amount of money that the employee thought was reasonable. So it's important to spell it out up front. Promoting from within is a really valuable way to keep employees excited about your company. because if everybody in your company knows that they have a shot at growing, developing, perhaps being something else or something more than what they are when they first start with you, it's a really strong carrot for why they'll want to remain with you. And you know, I see all the time employers coming to me struggling with retention. Turnover's high, and I hate to say it, but as we've got an aging workforce, more and more people are retiring, it's going to be harder and harder to get employees, and once you've got them, it's going to be harder and harder to keep them. So offering career advancement opportunities is a really significant way employers can do that. And I've got lots of examples of where companies I've worked with have, taken a shot on an internal employee. Yeah, maybe they're not quite as qualified as the external employee, but to a certain extent, I hate to say it, the devil you know, right? You already know they fit. You already know they've got really good experience that, is in your company. They know how you work. People like them. Those are some really good things to want to invest in. And if you can, like I said, if you can offer them the opportunity to grow, they're more likely to stick with you and to work harder for you. So then, how do you go about doing that? So how do you promote somebody? Well, first of all, it's really important in any kind of recruitment system, anytime you're going to recruit for a new job, to have the opportunity posted internally so your employees know about it. And I often find things go awry because companies put it on their webpage and they, market it. They put it in the newspaper, they put it on all these job posting sites, but because they don't specifically go out to employees and say, here's what we're hunting for, employees somehow feel that they aren't welcome to apply. So it's really important to specify in a handbook exactly how someone would go about getting a promotion and or applying for a job that interests them. And some employers have, okay, we will post every job internally first, and if we don't find an internal candidate, we'll go externally. I'm not a big advocate for that, truth be told. I think it just takes too much time. I will often say, we'll post externally and internally at the same time, and we'll interview internal candidates with the goal of promoting from within is our first choice. Something to that effect. With this idea that we want to bring people up, we want to grow them, but on the other hand, we don't want to wait around for 2, 3, 4 weeks for an interview process to go in internally before we start looking outside. And that's just a time factor and sort of practicality. Exiting employment is always a very difficult topic to discuss, but it's way easier to talk about it up front. So put it in your offer letter, put it in your handbook, explain what people can expect. When it's a distant concept on the horizon, it's way easier to learn about it. And then as you near it, or when you do get to a point where someone's exiting, you've already got it laid out exactly how you're going to handle it. And the kinds of things you want to think about include things like, well, what do we do with company property? What do we do with, the things that we need you to keep confidential? How are we going to handle references going forward? What can an employee expect from us as it relates to final paycheck? How quickly will we get it out to them? What about their record of employment? How soon can they expect that? Now, all of those kinds of things you can actually find in employment standards as the minimum. Of course, if you do better than the minimum, you should put that in your handbook as well. But it's important to lay it out and just explain it right up front, because it's sort of one of those things. Before you need it is the best time to talk about it, because then it isn't uncomfortable when it happens. And usually, truth be told, you put all that stuff down and people read it, they review it. Prior to resigning, they probably look and refer to it so they know what to expect. And then, if they do end up leaving, as long as you follow your side of the bargain, it runs smoothly, because there's, basically everybody knew what was going to happen. Privacy legislation has been in BC for a while now, and of course across the country, and probably increasingly we're starting to see this come up when we go to the doctor, the dentist, or we sign up for a newsletter or mailing list, because there's all of this ream of material that we're supposed to read about protecting information. Well, the interesting thing is, as employers, we have obligations to our employees and our clients as well, of course, for protecting their information. And I always find, I don't understand why it takes so much information and such a huge law to really say that we're obligated to keep information secure, to explain why we collect it, use it, and basically store it safely, and then ultimately to destroy it at the end in a way that fits with, respectful practices. And that's really all privacy legislation is. It's how you collect it, how you use information, how you store it, and then how you get rid of it when you're done. And so, candidly, there's some pretty good information on the web now that you can go to and learn how to create a policy. The problem I find is that the policy creating is easy. The hardest part is managing it. And, the biggest issue I see with my clients is as it relates to employee files and employee information is the manager has a file, payroll has a file, they might have a boss that has a file. If they happen to get transferred, someone else has a file, and we've got all these different files on different employees. And really, we're not actually complying with what the law says we're supposed to do. So, the solution to that is really to just understand what is employee information and what you're allowed to collect or not, to be really upfront about, what we use things for. Of course, you need to collect information in order to pay them. Of course, you need to collect that information in order to make sure that we can call a loved one if they get injured. These are things that people expect, but making sure that you clarify with your hires, new hires, and your current employees that this is what you're doing with it and that it isn't going to get used for other purposes. One of the other key things I often see is just lock those cabinets. I know we all trust each other. That's what happens. We all have a lot of trust for our employees, but we really should be locking our filing cabinets. We should be closing our doors, locking our computers when we leave so that unauthorized access can't happen. And that's the big thing is that it's part of our obligation, and therefore what we need to commit to employees is that we'll protect their information. And then as long as we follow through and we use it for what it's supposed to be used and we protect it and keep it safe, you're probably not going to find yourself in any trouble. In conclusion, to me, terms and conditions are a really critical part. They exist in your employment relationship, whether you spell them out or not. The problem is if we don't spell them out, then there's usually confusion, and confusion gets us in trouble as employers. So for me, having it spelled out in a handbook, putting it into an offer letter as well, if I can convince you of that, are really critical. And what I find is that you ease yourself from tons of questions and problems down the road. It's the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Those terms and conditions spelled out up front are definitely your ounce of prevention. And some of the legal cases that I've seen, it's such a simple fix that can really save you time and money down the road. It's really worth it.